There is a certain tenderness in the beginning of a transformation, not the kind that bursts forth in fire and fury, but the quiet sort, the kind that grows in the shadows of your own silence. It happens without warning, without noise, like the slow shift of tides or the bloom of a flower you weren't watching. It arrives when you least expect it, while pouring tea, while staring out the window, while listening to a song that reminds you of something you used to believe in. And suddenly, without ceremony, you realize something inside you has changed. You're no longer trying to be who you used to be. You begin to sense that the life you've been building isn't about becoming someone new, but about returning to someone ancient, someone familiar, a self you once abandoned, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. And now, with the same quiet grace that you lost her, you begin to call her back. Piece by piece, breath by breath, you begin to remember the softness in your voice, the wisdom in your stillness, the strength in your vulnerability. This isn't a journey of addition, it's a sacred subtraction, a peeling back, a letting go. You remember how long you've been running, how often you've lived on the edge of your own exhaustion, how you confused movement for progress, noise for meaning, performance for purpose. You used to run toward everything, toward success, toward approval, toward love. You used to believe that more was always better, that stillness was stagnation, that rest was laziness. But now you see it differently. You understand that running is often just a distraction from the truth, that sometimes the only way to find yourself is to stop, to sit, to listen to the voice beneath all the others. You don't shame yourself for the ways you survived. You know now that you did what you had to do, that there was a time when silence kept you safe, when people-pleasing helped you belong, when hiding was the only way you knew how to be seen. You don't resent those versions of yourself. You honor them. You thank them, because they kept you alive. But you also know that survival is not the same as living. And now you're ready to live. Not just exist, not just get by, but truly, fully, audaciously live. You stop asking yourself what others want from you. You start asking yourself what you want from life. You pause before saying yes. You notice the weight of your number. You stop agreeing to things just to keep the peace. You stop shrinking so others can feel big. You stop carrying the weight of other people's comfort at the cost of your own truth. You let yourself be inconvenient. You let yourself take up space. You let yourself matter to you. Your mornings feel different now, not because you've mastered some perfect routine, but because you've stopped waking up in resistance. You no longer dread the day. You no longer open your eyes with a sigh. You wake slowly, gently. You let your body stretch before your thoughts begin to race. You let the light in. You drink water like a ritual. You speak kindly to yourself, even if your dreams were heavy, even if your heart feels tired. You say, "It's okay. We're here now. We begin again." You've stopped measuring your worth by your productivity. You understand now that you're not a machine, that you don't exist to perform, that rest isn't earned, it's essential. You stop pushing through the pain. You stop ignoring your limits. You listen when your body whispers instead of waiting for it to scream. You no longer glorify burnout. You choose sustainability, slowness, presence. And in doing so, you discover a kind of peace that isn't attached to your achievements, a peace that comes simply from being. You let yourself feel again, all of it, the ache, the joy, the confusion, the longing. You stop labeling your emotions as good or bad. You stop trying to control them. You let them wash over you like waves, trusting that they will pass. You cry without shame. You laugh without apology. You let yourself be moved. You stop numbing. You stop avoiding. You feel fully and deeply because you understand now that feeling is not a weakness. It's a way back to life. Your relationships begin to shift. You start craving depth over comfort, truth over convenience. You no longer tolerate shallow conversations that feel like performance. You want to be seen, really seen, and you want to see others too. Not just their curated selves, but their full, messy, radiant humanity. You ask real questions. You listen with your whole body. You show up with your full heart. And if some relationships fall away in the process, you let them. You stop chasing people who need you to be less in order to stay. You've stopped trying to convince people of your worth. You no longer beg for love. You no longer twist yourself into someone you're not just to be accepted. You know now that love that must be earned isn't love, it's a transaction. And you're done selling yourself short. You don't chase, you attract. Not by pretending, but by becoming. By embodying the love you desire. By filling your own cup so full that your overflow is a gift, not a plea. You stop fearing solitude. It no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like clarity, like home, like a sacred container where you can hear yourself think, where you can breathe without adjusting your inhale to match someone else's rhythm. You stop distracting yourself from your own presence. You light candles just for you. You play your favorite songs. You dance in the kitchen like no one's watching, because no one is, and it doesn't matter. You're not performing anymore. You're living, and that in itself is enough. You forgive yourself more easily now, not because you don't take accountability, but because you finally understand that self-punishment isn't the same as growth. You stop replaying old mistakes like a punishment reel. You stop identifying with every misstep. You say, that happened, and I am still learning, and I am still worthy. You know now that the past doesn't define you, it refines you. That regret is only useful if it opens the door to compassion. And so you open it, again and again. You hold space for your younger self. You see her clearly now, the girl who just wanted to be enough, the boy who carried the world on his shoulders, the version of you who smiled when they were breaking, who gave when they were empty, who tried so hard to be okay. You don't criticize them anymore. You don't mock their innocence. You wrap them in love. You say, you did your best, and I'm so proud of you. You become the safety you never had. You become the parent you always needed. You become the home you were searching for. And slowly the world starts to feel different, not because it's changed, but because you have. You see beauty in the small things again. You cry at sunsets. You smile at strangers. You laugh until your stomach hurts. You feel your heartbeat and say, thank you. You're not healed all the way. You're not done growing, but you're here, you're present, and that presence is the miracle. That presence is the proof that life is still happening for you, not to you. You understand now that healing isn't a destination. It's a way of being. It's choosing every day to come home to yourself, to choose softness over self-judgment, to choose rest over running, to choose love over fear. And you don't always get it right, but you're showing up, you're trying, you're listening, and that, more than anything, is enough. There is a new rhythm unfolding within you now, one not dictated by urgency or fear, but by inner alignment. You start to feel the beat of your own soul, and slowly, that rhythm becomes your compass. You begin to notice how often you ignored that rhythm in the past, how many times you said yes when you meant no, how often you kept moving when your spirit was begging you to pause. And now you're beginning to honor the subtle shifts inside you. You stop asking, what should I do? And begin asking, what feels true? And that question, though small, reshapes everything. You find yourself standing at the edge of who you used to be. Not in judgment, not in shame, but in reverence. You look back and realize just how many versions of yourself you've outgrown. You see the people pleaser, the perfectionist, the one who performs strength while silently falling apart. And you thank them all. They each carried you across terrains you didn't yet know how to navigate. But you also know it's time to let them rest. It's time to stop performing a life that doesn't feel like yours and finally begin living the one that does. You start noticing how many of your patterns were inherited. Not consciously, not intentionally, but handed down like heirlooms soaked in quiet pain. The silence in your family became your default. The way love was shown or withheld etched itself into the way you relate to others. The way conflict was avoided or met with anger taught you how to survive, not thrive. And now, you pause. You reflect. You no longer react from reflex. You respond from awareness. You break cycles. You make choices your ancestors never had the tools or safety to make. You honor their survival by choosing your healing. You learn how to say, I don't know, without feeling like a failure. You stop pretending to have it all figured out. You no longer rush to fix things that are meant to unfold. You let life be uncertain. You allow the in-between to shape you. You sit in the questions without demanding answers. You trust the timing you once tried so hard to control. You no longer measure your progress by what you've achieved, but by how deeply you've surrendered to what is. You understand now that wisdom lives not in the certainty of your plans, but in the humility to let them change. You begin to love yourself without conditions, not because you finally reached some level of achievement or appearance, not from brokenness, but from the lie that you were ever broken in the first place. You create space for silence, not the kind filled with avoidance, but the kind filled with presence. You turn off the noise. You sit with the hum of your own breath. You stop needing background distractions to feel okay. You welcome the stillness. You listen to what it has to say. And in that listening, you discover things you've missed for years. Desires that were buried under survival, dreams that were silenced by doubt, needs that were, but because you realize you were never meant to earn your own love. It was always yours. You start speaking to yourself like someone who matters. You stop using shame as motivation. You stop using guilt as fuel. You rest without apology. You make room for your own joy. You allow yourself to exist in softness. And the more you love yourself, not as a project, but as a presence, the more love you attract. Not because you've changed, but because you've come home. You're learning that vulnerability is not a liability. You no longer hide your tears. You no longer bear your fears. You share your truth without the need for approval. You don't dress your pain up to make it digestible for others. You let it be raw, real. And in doing so, you attract people who don't flinch at your truth. People who meet you in the messy. People who offer presence, not pity. You stop settling for conversations that avoid the depth you crave. You let yourself be fully known, even when it's scary, even when it's uncertain, because you know now that true connection requires the courage to be seen. You stop rushing your process. You give yourself permission to unfold at your own pace. Some days you soar, other days you sink, but you're no longer attached to perfection. You no longer need to get it right. You simply keep showing up. You understand now that growth is not linear, that healing is not a checklist, that progress often looks like circles before it becomes a spiral. And so you rest when you need. You rise when you're ready. You extend yourself grace in the gap between where you are and where you wish you were. You start redefining success. It's no longer about accolades or applause. It's about how deeply you're able to stay with yourself in the hard moments. It's about whether your actions reflect your values, whether your peace is protected, whether your joy is felt, not performed. You begin to find success in saying no to what doesn't serve you, in walking away from spaces that require your silence, in choosing truth over comfort. You stop seeking a life that looks good and start building one that feels good. You begin to mother yourself, to reparent the parts of you that never learned how to feel safe, how to rest, how to receive. You hold your inner child with tenderness. You tell them, I see you. I'm here now. You're safe with me. You don't try to fix them. You simply love them. And through that love, you rewrite everything. You become your own nurturer, your own protector, your own guide. You stop waiting to be rescued. You rescue yourself ignored out of habit. You begin to hear the voice of your soul again. And it sounds like truth. It sounds like home. You learn that boundaries are not about keeping people out, but about keeping yourself in, about protecting the energy you've spent years reclaiming. You stop apologizing for the ways you protect your peace. You stop justifying your limits to those who refuse to honor them. You draw the line not from anger, but from clarity. You choose your own well-being, even when it disappoints others. You know now that your worth is not found in your ability to be everything to everyone. It's found in your ability to be everything to yourself first. You no longer abandon yourself in the name of connection. You stop betraying your values to be loved. You stop morphing into someone you're not just to be chosen. You choose yourself, not in a way that excludes others, but in a way that includes your truth. You stop being available for love that feels like confusion. You wait for the love that feels like clarity. And while you wait, you love yourself better than anyone ever has. not as a backup plan, but as the foundation for everything that will follow. You realize that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. You stop holding grudges like weapons. You stop waiting for others to acknowledge the harm. You choose to release, not because they deserve it, but because you do. You stop letting old wounds define your worth. You let the past stay in the past, not to forget, but to free yourself. You walk forward, not carrying the weight of what happened, but carrying the wisdom it gave you. You forgive, and in doing so, you become lighter, clearer, freer. You've begun to understand that healing isn't always about becoming a new person. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. You strip away the roles, the masks, the expectations. You return to the wild, intuitive, feeling self that always knew. The one who danced without fear, who spoke without apology, who loved without limits. You meet her again, and this time, you don't silence her. You honor her. You let her lead. And here you are, once again, choosing yourself. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. Not because the world claps for it, but because your soul does. You're not finished. You're not perfect. But you are present. And that presence, that's where the real transformation begins. There's a moment when you realize that the life you once chased so desperately no longer fits the shape of your soul. It's not that the dreams were wrong, it's just that they belong to a version of you who was still trying to be chosen, still trying to be seen, still mistaking worth for achievement. And now you find yourself holding those old dreams in your hands, not with grief, but with gratitude. You whisper, "Thank you for getting me here." And then just as gently, you let them go. Because what once drove you no longer defines you. You are no longer the person who dreamed them. You've grown, you've shifted, and your spirit is asking for something deeper now. Not a life that looks impressive, but one that feels honest. You start measuring the value of your life in moments of presence, not in titles or timelines, but in your ability to sit with your own heart and not flinch, in the way you speak to yourself when no one is watching, in the softness you offer your past, the grace you extend to your fears, the gentleness with which you carry your pain. You begin to realize that healing was never about becoming untouchable. It was always about becoming more human, more whole, more willing to meet every part of yourself with love. You've stopped needing a big moment to feel worthy. You find sacredness in the smallest things now. The way the sunlight wraps around your shoulders in the early morning, the sound of laughter shared with someone who doesn't need you to perform, the taste of something warm after a long day. You no longer need your life to be epic to feel alive. You just need it to be true. And in that truth, even the most ordinary things shimmer with meaning. Even the pauses feel poetic. Even the silence speaks. You begin to make peace with your mess. You no longer view your healing as a checklist. You stop grading yourself on how put together you appear. You know now that growth is chaotic, that some days you'll wake up and feel like you've taken 10 steps back, that progress isn't linear and peace isn't always loud. You let go of the idea that healing should look pretty. You let it be raw. You let it be real. You let it be yours. And in doing so, you stop waiting to be perfect before you allow yourself to be happy. You become more present in your own skin, not because it fits every ideal, but because you've stopped abandoning it. You look in the mirror and don't rush to critique. You don't pinch or pull or sigh in disappointment. You place your hand on your chest and say, "Thank you for carrying me." You move from judgment to gratitude, from shame to respect. You feed your body not just to shrink it, but to nourish it. You move it not to punish, but to celebrate. You wear clothes that feel like freedom, not apology. And in that shift, your body begins to trust you again. It softens, it speaks, and you listen. You stop demanding your healing be immediate. You allow it to be lifelong. You understand that every season brings new lessons, that old wounds sometimes resurface not to haunt you, but to invite you deeper. You stop resenting the moments you thought you'd already moved past. You say, "There's more to learn here," and you stay. You stay with yourself when it's uncomfortable. You stay when it's messy. You stay when all you want to do is run. And that staying, that's the healing. That's the rewiring. That's what transforms survival into safety. You begin to fall in love with the parts of yourself you once tried to hide. The tenderness, the intensity, the wildness, the quiet. You see now that nothing about you was ever too much. It was just too big for the containers you were placed in. You stop editing your soul to fit someone else's comfort. You expand. You take up space. You let your light be unapologetic, even when it unsettles those who still live in their shadows. You were not born to be understood by everyone. You were born to be fully, freely, radiantly yourself. You start being honest about your needs, not because you're needy, but because you're human. You no longer wait for people to read your mind. You don't drop hints or make yourself small in the hopes that someone will notice. You speak. You ask. You say, I need rest. I need space. I need to be held. And you say it without shame, because your needs are not burdens. They're bridges. They're the foundation of true intimacy. And the people who can meet you there are the ones who get to stay. You no longer confuse chaos for chemistry. You stop equating emotional highs and lows with love. You understand now that stability is not boring. It's sacred. That peace is not the absence of passion. It's the presence of safety. You no longer chase people who make you guess where you stand. You don't confuse inconsistency with excitement. You wait for the kind of connection that feels like clarity, like breath, like exhale. And in the meantime, you build that kind of relationship with yourself. You become the soft landing you always needed. You learn how to hold space for your own heart. You stop abandoning yourself in the hard moments. You stop saying, "What's wrong with me?" and start saying, "What do I need?" You give yourself rest before the burnout, compassion before the breakdown, grace before the guilt. You stop demanding resilience from a heart that is still healing. You let it beat at its own pace. You let it find its own rhythm. And in that permission, you create a new home within yourself. You allow joy without justification. You stop waiting for all the pieces to fall into place before you laugh. You stop postponing your happiness until you've earned it. You celebrate your life while it's still unfolding, while you're still figuring it out. You don't need every answer to feel grateful. You don't need every wound to be closed to feel whole. You stop living in delay. You start choosing delight in this breath, in this moment, in the simple fact that you're still here. You become your own anchor, your own compass, your own source. You stop outsourcing your sense of self. You stop giving people the power to define you. You know who you are, not in a rigid, performative way, but in a grounded, embodied way. You know your values, your truths, your rhythms. You live from them, not to prove anything, but because they feel like home. And in doing so, you attract people, opportunities, and experiences that align, not because you're chasing, but because you're finally aligned within. You stop fearing the unknown, not because it stops being scary, but because you stop needing to predict every outcome to feel safe. You learn to trust the unfolding. You understand that uncertainty is the birthplace of possibility. You no longer grip the future with clenched fists. You hold it with open palms. You say, I don't know what's coming, but I trust myself to meet it. And with that trust, you take the next step, and the next, one breath at a time. You're not who you were, and yet you've never been more yourself. Every layer you've shed brought you closer. Every tear you've cried washed something away. Every pause you honored gave you room to breathe again. You are not a work in progress. You are a work of art in motion, and your life even now, even here, is worth celebrating. You no longer feel the need to chase moments. You don't grasp for tomorrow or cling to yesterday as tightly as you once did. Something in you has softened. There's a new rhythm to your presence, a gentle surrender to what is. You've begun to notice how time slows when you are with yourself completely, how the smallest details expand into meaning when your mind stops reaching for what's next. The steam rising from your cup of tea, the quiet creak of your home settling at night, the soft hush of your breath in the stillness of morning. You begin to live less in anticipation and more in observation. And life, once rushed and blurry, starts to come into focus in the here and now. You start witnessing your triggers not as enemies, but as invitations. invitations to revisit parts of you still aching for gentleness, for understanding. Where once you recoiled in shame or exploded in blame, now you pause, you breathe, you say, "Ah, there you are again." And you meet the hurt with presence instead of panic. You begin to track it, not in judgment, but in curiosity. You ask, where did this start? What does this part of me need? You stop resenting your pain for being there. You learn that it's not here to ruin you, it's here to remind you, to awaken something that's ready to be seen. You stop outsourcing your intuition. You don't need permission to follow what feels aligned. You don't poll the crowd before moving toward what calls to you. You begin to trust the pull within you, the subtle, sacred nudge that says, this way, even when no one else understands, even when it doesn't make sense on paper. You trust your yes. You trust your number. You know now that your soul speaks in feelings, not logic, and you listen. You honor it. Because that quiet knowing, that's the map you were born with. You are no longer surprised by your cycles, the rise and fall of your energy, the ebb and flow of your emotions. You don't ask yourself what's wrong when your spark dims. You don't panic when your motivation disappears. You know now that you are not a machine. You are a wave, a rhythm, a season. And like the moon, like the tide, like the earth itself, you are allowed to wane, to rest, to be dark for a while. You honor the full spectrum of your becoming. You allow the pauses to be as sacred as the progress, the stillness as sacred as the bloom. Your relationships begin to reflect the work you've done within. You're no longer drawn to what drains you. You don't confuse intensity for intimacy. You don't mistake chaos for connection. You crave peace now, safety, reciprocity. You want people who see you, not just the curated version of you, but the real you. The one who cries easily and laughs loudly. The one who's soft and sharp and beautifully complicated. And until those people arrive, you stop settling for half-hearted connections. You don't beg for attention. You don't chase affection. You build a life so full, so grounded in self-love, that anyone who enters must rise to meet you where you are. You begin to unlearn what love isn't. It's not walking on eggshells. It's not sacrificing your boundaries to avoid conflict. It's not tolerating mistreatment just because someone says they care. Love, you now understand, is respect. It's communication. It's safety. It's choosing each other in the hard moments, not just the easy ones. And more than anything, it's mutual. You no longer perform for love. You receive it, freely, fully, or not at all. You begin to dismantle the belief that your worth is tied to your usefulness. You no longer exist just to serve, to give, to please. You let yourself be a full person, not just a function. You stop doing for the sake of being valued. You rest. You create. You play. You exist outside of the role of caretaker, fixer, achiever. And the world doesn't fall apart when you do. You stop earning rest. You stop earning joy. You stop earning love. You start receiving them as your birthright. You return to creativity not as a task, but as a sanctuary. You write not to be read, but to be released. You draw, sing, dance, build, not for applause, but for aliveness. You create just to feel connected to the part of you that still believes in magic. You stop waiting for your art to be good enough. You stop demanding perfection. You create simply because it's who you are. And in doing so, you reclaim a part of yourself that got buried beneath expectations. You reclaim your spark. You give yourself grace in your grief. You no longer rush the healing. You don't tell your sadness to hurry up and move on. You sit with it. You listen. You say you can stay as long as you need. You hold your grief like a companion, not an inconvenience. You let the tears fall without needing to explain them. You know now that loss doesn't follow a timeline, that closure isn't always clean, and that healing isn't linear. You allow the waves, you let them shape you. You rise when you're ready. You stop needing every part of your life to be tidy. You let some things remain unresolved, some questions unanswered, some stories unfinished. You no longer equate peace with perfection. You learn to hold contradictions. You let yourself be both certain and confused, both hopeful and afraid, both healing and hurting. You no longer try to make sense of everything. You simply make space, and in that space, life becomes less about control and more about communion, less about fixing and more about feeling. You embrace softness without apology. You stop bracing yourself for disappointment. You stop expecting pain just because it once arrived uninvited. You open. You hope. You let yourself believe in good things, not because you're naive, but because you're resilient. Because even after everything, your heart still chooses light. You still believe in connection, in laughter and love. And that belief, that's your strength. That's your rebellion. That's your return. And maybe in the quiet of this return, you begin to see something clearly for the first time. That you are not behind. That you are not broken. That you are not lost. You are simply unfolding at your own pace, in your own way, on your own sacred path. You look at yourself, not with criticism, but with awe, not with fear, but with reverence. Because everything you've been through, everything you've survived, everything you've rebuilt within yourself has led you here, to this breath, to this becoming, to this version of you who finally understands that she was never meant to rush, never meant to perform, never meant to be perfect. She was simply meant to remember, to return, and to rise. There's a soft unraveling that begins when you stop clinging so tightly to the identity you built just to survive. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins in pieces, like a slow shedding of armor that no longer fits the life you're trying to live. You don't even notice it at first. Maybe it starts with saying no when you used to say yes. Maybe it's choosing quiet over performance, solitude over distraction. Maybe it's the moment you pause before replying, the moment you check in with yourself first. Slowly, you begin to release the self you became out of necessity and reconnect with the self that was always waiting underneath. And that self, she's not loud, she's not demanding. She's steady, honest, ancient, and you've missed her more than you knew. You begin to understand that self-love isn't a mood or a motivational quote. It's a daily practice, a lived commitment. It's in the way you feed yourself when no one is watching, in the way you speak to yourself in your own mind, in the choices you make when it would be easier to default to old patterns. You stop looking for self-love in grand gestures. You find it in the mundane, in the way you choose rest before burnout, in the way you forgive yourself for being tired, in how you soften the voice inside that used to criticize and begin replacing it with one that knows how to say, "It's okay, you're learning, you're still good." You begin to let go of the need to be understood by everyone. Where once you would have tried to explain your every move, now you simply move. You no longer over-explain your boundaries, your silence, your distance. You no longer shrink your decisions to avoid discomfort. You realize that clarity with yourself is more important than acceptance from others. You stop performing for a validation you no longer crave. You start valuing the kind of peace that doesn't need to be broadcast, the kind that lives in your chest and stretches across your breath, steady and unapologetic. You stop rushing into healing. You stop seeking quick fixes or chasing spiritual highs to escape the real work. You let the process be messy, uneven, nonlinear. You stay when it's hard. You breathe through the discomfort. You don't flinch at your sadness or shame. You let them take a seat at the table, not to control the conversation, but to be acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement, they begin to soften. You stop trying to conquer your emotions and start building a relationship with them. You learn how to sit with your pain, not as an intruder, but as a teacher. And through that sitting, you discover peace, not in the absence of difficulty, but in your presence with it. You notice that your tolerance for the superficial has diminished. You crave depth now. Depth in connection, depth in conversation, depth in how you spend your days. You stop wasting your energy on performative relationships, on the kind of interactions that leave your spirit tired. You become more intentional with your presence, more protective of your time. You don't ghost or disappear. You just shift your energy inward, toward what nourishes, toward what sustains. And as you do, something beautiful happens. The right people begin to meet you there. The ones who don't require you to shrink to be loved. The ones who see your fullness and stay. You begin to question the narratives you inherited, the ones that told you who to be, how to act, what to want. You start asking, is this mine? Every time a belief surfaces, every time guilt or shame creeps in, you trace its roots. You unlearn what no longer serves. You challenge the voice that says your worth is based on your output, your beauty, your usefulness. You stop living in someone else's blueprint. You write your own, not out of rebellion, but out of remembrance. You remember what it felt like to want things before the world told you what was acceptable to want. And you begin again from that place of truth. You become more gentle with your inner seasons. There are days when you'll feel like everything is blooming, and others where everything feels bare. You stop trying to sustain constant productivity. You stop measuring your value by how much you accomplish. You honor your winter phases, those days when the only thing you can do is breathe. You see now that rest is not a reward, but a rhythm. That quiet is not emptiness, but incubation. That your worth was never in your doing, but in your being. And you begin to live accordingly, with grace, with patience, with respect for your own cadence. You recognize that your sensitivity is not a flaw. It's a superpower. You no longer apologize for feeling deeply, for caring too much, for noticing what others miss. You understand that your heart was never meant to be hardened, that your softness is your strength. You embrace your empathy, not as a burden, but as a bridge, a way to connect, to understand, to hold space. You don't numb out or toughen up. You lean in. You learn how to protect your energy without closing your heart. And that balance, that's your evolution. You find yourself becoming more discerning with your energy. You stop trying to fix people who don't want to grow. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop engaging in conversations that only drain you. You learn how to choose your peace over your pride, how to walk away from what doesn't serve, not with bitterness, but with clarity. You're beginning to soften toward the past. You don't rewatch it with anger. You don't replay every mistake like a punishment reel. You've grown enough now to hold that past version of you with compassion, to see that she was trying, always trying, that she didn't know then what you know now. And instead of judgment, you offer her grace. You say you were doing your best, and I forgive you. Because she got you here. She made the choices she could with the tools she had. And if you're softer now, if you're wiser now, if you're more alive now, it's because of her, not in spite of her. You allow your dreams to shift. You let them evolve as you evolve. You used to cling to them tightly, thinking that changing your mind meant failure. Now you understand that growth means letting go of what no longer aligns, even if it once lit you up. Even if you once built your identity around it, you're no longer afraid to start again. You know now that beginnings are sacred, even when they don't come with a roadmap. You trust your desires to lead you where you need to go, even if the path doesn't make sense yet. You trust the feeling, the knowing, the deep pulse of truth that lives beneath the noise. You recognize now that healing isn't about becoming invincible. It's about becoming tender. It's about feeling more, not less. You used to armor up. You used to push everything down. You used to believe that being untouched by life was the goal. But now you feel it all. The ache, the joy, the longing, the love. You don't hide from your emotions. You don't see your tears as weakness. You understand that your sensitivity is your compass, that your heart breaking open is how the light gets in. You live raw now, and in that rawness, you find freedom. You stop expecting others to give you what you've learned to give yourself. You're no longer waiting for someone to come along and see your worth before you do. You no longer hand out blueprints for how to love you, hoping someone will finally get it right. You get it right. You wake up and choose yourself, first and fully. Not because you're closed off, but because you're open in a way that no longer leaks. You pour into your own life with intention. And if someone joins you there, if they amplify what you've already created, that's beautiful. But it's not required. You've made peace with your own company. You've built a home within yourself that doesn't feel lonely anymore. You've redefined what strength means. It's not in how much you carry. It's in knowing when to put things down. It's in asking for help without shame. It's in setting boundaries without guilt. It's in saying, I don't have the capacity right now, and meaning it. Strength is not in self-denial, it's in self-respect. You stop pushing through pain just to appear okay. You stop performing resilience. You start practicing it in quiet choices, in soft pauses, in the way you allow yourself to rest, to cry, to not know. You become strong not in spite of your vulnerability, but because of it. You begin to believe in timing, not as a delay, but as a divine orchestration. You don't rush the unfolding anymore. You trust that what's meant for you is moving toward you in its own rhythm. You stop forcing connections, opportunities, answers. You wait, not passively, but with presence. You live your life in the meantime. You build, create, love, rest. You don't sit idle, but you don't grasp either. You know that what's aligned cannot be missed, that what's real cannot be lost, that everything happening now is preparing you for everything coming next. And in that knowing, you relax, you root, you receive. You release the need to constantly explain your healing. You don't owe your process to anyone. You don't need to narrate your journey for it to be valid. You stop seeking approval for the way you're choosing to grow. You let your evolution be sacred, be personal, be yours. You don't justify the relationships you've ended, the choices you've made, the quiet shifts in your energy. You don't water down your truth to make it easier for others to swallow. You live in your truth fully, and that in itself is the healing. You start recognizing that joy is not a destination, it's a decision, a choice you make even when things are imperfect. Even when your heart is still learning how to trust again, even when the world feels heavy. You choose joy not because you're naive, but because you're awake. Because you know that joy is resistance. Joy is resilience. Joy is what keeps your soul from closing. And so, you laugh, you play, you notice the way light hits your walls in the morning. You collect moments like treasures. You let your life be tender and golden, even if it's also tender and bruised. And finally, you stop waiting to be finished before you begin loving your life. You love it now, as it is, with all its unpolished edges, with all its unanswered questions, with all its holy mess. You start allowing beauty into your life without needing it to be productive. You light candles because they comfort you, not because there's company coming over. You buy flowers for yourself just because they make you smile. You create rituals, slow mornings, evening walks, quiet journaling, not as obligations, but as offerings to your own soul. You realize that you don't need a reason to make your life beautiful, that the mere fact of being alive, of being aware, is enough. And so you stop waiting for special occasions. You make everyday moments sacred. You infuse your life with softness, with intention, with presence. You stop seeing setbacks as failures. You see them as redirections. You no longer spiral when plans fall through. You no longer attach your identity to outcomes. You let go more easily. You surrender more quickly. You understand now that life doesn't punish, it teaches. That the loss, the delay, the rejection were never the end. They were just another turn on your path. And that path, it's always leading you deeper into yourself. Always unfolding, even when you can't see it. Even when it feels like everything's standing still. And maybe that's the most radical act of all. You stay with yourself. You stop abandoning who you are to chase who you think you should be. You stop running from your reflection. You sit with her. You listen. You love her. You let her take up space in your own life. You treat her not as a project, but as a person. Not as something to be fixed, but as someone to be held. And in doing so, you become your own sanctuary. Your own safe place, your own home. There comes a moment in your journey when you stop bracing for impact. You've lived for so long expecting things to fall apart, expecting the good to be followed by something that would hurt, expecting the calm to only be a prelude to another storm. And maybe for a while, that was your reality. So you learned to anticipate it. You learned to distrust joy. You learned to doubt peace. But now something is changing. Now you're learning that it's okay to let your shoulders drop. It's okay to breathe deeply. It's okay to let life be soft. You don't have to constantly prepare for what might go wrong. You can finally begin to receive what is going right. You stop treating happiness like a debt you'll have to pay later. You stop rushing through it, afraid it will disappear the moment you lean into it. You learn to linger in it, to taste it fully, to savor the way it lives in your body. You allow joy to stay, even if it comes alongside uncertainty. Even if you still carry pain in other parts of your heart, you learn that joy and sorrow can exist together, that you don't have to be free of sadness to be worthy of joy, that happiness is not a reward for healing, it is part of the healing. You begin to understand that some of the most powerful healing happens when no one sees it, in quiet moments, in private choices, in the way you speak kindly to yourself in the middle of a hard day, in the way you don't follow every urge to run away, in how you stay when staying feels hard. You stop needing your growth to be visible to anyone else. You stop performing your healing. You let it be yours, messy, sacred, imperfect, real. And in that quiet, invisible work, you build something unshakable. You learn how to be with yourself in discomfort without needing to escape. You no longer reach for distractions the moment you feel unease. You don't immediately scroll, shop, snack, or pour yourself into productivity. You breathe. You feel the sensation rise. You ask yourself, what's underneath this? And you wait for the answer, not from your mind, but from your body. You no longer treat discomfort like a problem to solve. You treat it like a signal to listen to. And as you do, you begin to notice that your capacity grows, that you don't break under the weight of your emotions. You bend. You breathe, you stay. You begin to protect your peace like a sacred inheritance. You no longer let chaos in through open doors. You no longer invite confusion because it once felt familiar. You've had enough noise, enough drama, enough dysfunction disguised as connection. You're no longer interested in what looks good on the outside but feels heavy on the inside. You want lightness, realness, truth. You no longer engage out of obligation. You stop explaining yourself to people who've never tried to understand you. You know now that your energy is finite, precious, and you give it with intention. You stop needing to be seen to know you matter. You don't rely on praise or attention to feel alive. You start to feel your own presence, and it's enough. You walk through the world with a quiet kind of confidence, the kind that doesn't need applause, doesn't need permission. You trust yourself. You move in alignment with your own truth. And because of that, you no longer fear being alone. You enjoy your own company.